don't see on regular TV. From another perspective, something relative to your needs. And we gonna have deep subjects, and we gonna turn the lens. And there's no topic we won't skip, so please don't miss weekly, yeah. Tune in weekly to check in, weekly check-in, weekly check-in, weekly check-in. Tune in to weekly, tune in, check-in, weekly check-in.
Enjoy it, you know what I'm saying? And this is like, we forever will disagree, but that's what I love is that we are comfortable in articulating our disagreements, where we are, how we stand, because we represent, I think, a contingency that is important to discuss and articulate because we move the agenda forward, right? So,
and I think the respect, right? The mutual respect of one another. And I think, so if we were to start off with a lot of what you talked about in what has changed, I think that's what COVID has made a lot of us realize, right, is that on a very personal, spiritual, religious, however you see yourself level, is that you have been grinding, running, chasing all of this. And one pandemic has put everything at a halt. It has made you recalibrate, right? I remember as a Christian at the beginning of the year, the sermons that were being preached on about 2020 being a year of vision. And I remember after the pandemic hit, many people were like, well, it ain't no year of vision. And I said, no, it's quite the opposite. It's exactly the year of vision, right? Mm-hmm. It is making us see one another, regardless of our race, regardless of our sex, regardless of our sexual preference. Regardless of our religious preferences, it's making us see each other again. And I think that to me is the biggest lesson out of this year is, how do I see you? And when I see you, do I allow you to stand in your power and give you enough respect so that you can stand in your power so that I can stand in mine?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. So for those of you, we actually were talking, I think we've been about, an hour in talking, and Sherice didn't know I wasn't recording. So we had a whole pre-show debate about everything under the sun. But I think this is about what, I'm glad we actually did have this pre-show and that we were able to talk beforehand, because I think some things that you need to speak about offline and in a comfortable space, So I appreciate that. But welcome to the weekly check-in. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I am Kaya Shivers. I am talking with the dynamic Dr. Sherice J. Nelson, who is a professor of political science at Southern University, excuse me. And
it's Sherice, not Sherice, it's Sherice.
Oh, okay. Shit. I'm so sorry. Excuse me, Sherice. I'm so sorry. I apologize. Sherice, okay. I got the Janae and the Sherice mixed up. Sherice, yes. You know what it is? Because I usually do this. Sherice J. Nelson. See, I didn't do that. That's what happened. But if it, this is the end of the semester for us. So I know, we got a lot going on. We're grading papers. We're emailing students that probably about to fail, all this stuff like that. So I 100% apologize for that. But we have been talking about having this great reflective conversation about 2020, moving into what we call the light series at Arc Republic, where we reflect, but we want to shine light on the good things that have come out of a year that has been very difficult, that has, has really put everybody, the world, on its ass. But specifically, let's talk about what it looks like in the United States. So we started off with the question girl, now I'm like, damn it, is it Shanice or Sherice? That Sherice said is that, how has COVID-19 and the George Floyd protests changed the game? So I'm going to let you finish your thought, Dr. Nelson.
Yeah, so there are a few things that, for me, generally, that have happened. it is, I think, another chance in American history for us to have a racial reckoning. I don't think this will be the last time we have a racial reckoning. I think I think we'll make progress. I think we'll put our head back in the sand and then we'll have another. Hopefully it won't have to be based upon a death. But I do believe that we are at that juncture again, right? I think in many ways that we are at the same emotional juncture that we were when we came to Civil War. And I think we're at the same emotional juncture. I don't think that we're at the same physical juncture as far as actually having a succession and a succession, right? Because South Carolina seceded from the Union, and South Carolina seceded from the Union because England stopped the slave trade in the mainland, and that directly affected South Carolina more than any of the other states because they were trading with Barbados directly, and by trading with Barbados directly and the ending of the slave trade, it totally changed their economy and then made them hyper vigilant and very nervous about the existence of slavery, which is why they seceded kind of in a knee-jerk reaction, and we got the war that we got. But I don't think that we're there because I don't really believe economically we are in that dire place. And what I mean by that is if California, right, the state of the union, that's the largest, that's the 6th largest economy in the world, et cetera, who's been treated horribly by this current administration, if they decided not to secede out of their own economic interest, out of their displeasure with the country, I don't feel that although we're at this tension point, that we'll see states secede from the union. But I do think we're at that point emotionally. And I think we're at that point emotionally because this is the moment like then where we have to decide what country we're going to be. Are we going to keep trying to make racial progress, or are we going to say, no, we're not going to make any more racial progress and we're going to stand still where we are? And I think that is the emotional moment, is what was caught up in the Civil War. And I think that's the moment that we're in now. So that's what I think is the largest point that has come out of this year, right? Who are we going to be in the narrative of racial progression? And I think George Floyd represents that in so many ways, because many of the people that were just outright outraged by what they saw were liberal white folks who swore up and down that they weren't racist. Right? It's these liberal white folks that said, I'm not racist. I've championed this cause and I've championed this cause and I've done this and I've done that. There's no way. And in that moment, when that man lost his life on asphalt just for being Black, it made liberal white folks wake up and say, wait a minute, that's not my reality every day. That's not something I have to think about. I don't go inside of a store and then think when I come out, I could die. And I think that to me is reflexive of the Bloody Sunday moment that happened in the civil rights movement, where whites then saw, right, visibly saw a level of violence that they just could not comprehend. Because again, I'm a good white person. There's no reason that I see myself as racist.
But nor could they excuse at that point.
Nor could they excuse. And just like they couldn't excuse George Floyd, they couldn't excuse what happened on Bloody Sunday. So I feel the same. I feel the connections, right? I feel the connections in the fact that you have a Jew and a Black reverend out of Dr. Martin Luther King's church running at the seat of the old Confederacy in Atlanta, right? And running in the state of Georgia, right? In the seat of the old Confederacy, right? It's not by accident that you have a Jew and a Black man that preaches that at Ebenezer Baptist Church. So I think we're at that moment again. And I think that is the clear vision for us in the United States. What are we going to do? Are we going to racially progress? Or are we going to stand still?
So what are some specificities in terms of how did people push the line and really forcing people to not only just talk about it, but just begin to manifest that? What are some things that you see?
So from a legislative perspective that we talked about before in the pre-show, it was the George Floyd policing bill. And the reason that I saw that as a huge step forward wasn't just the bill or not then named after it, or even the pomp and circumstance of bending down and taking the knee and the kente cloth. It was the idea that for the first time, all Democrats inside the House of Representatives agreed on removing immunity for police officers. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was huge. That has been a line in the sand for so many of them for so long. And it was with this that they're like, you know what? This needs to have consequences. And right now, we know that law does not give us the ability for this type of action to have consequences. So it's bigger than banning a chokehold. It's bigger than a maneuver. It's about the idea, right? And this is, again, to my point about racial progression. It's about the idea that you can kill a Black person and not face consequences.
Right.
And that, to me, was a step forward that you get, you know, conservative members of the Democratic Party saying, this is too much and this is enough. And I do not believe without his death and without the visualization of his death that we would have been able to get that. I think another thing that we have seen is this idea of a reemergence or the importance of civic participation and organized activism. And so it may not look like the civil rights, right? It may not look like SNCC, right? It may not look like the SCLC. And for those that don't know the difference, the SCLC was the more adult, like I call the more adult organization, and SNCC was more of the youth organization, right? And we may not see it in those hierarchical models, right? A shout out to the Combahee River Collective, Black women and Black feminism who have been organizing and pushing in this way for years. But I think that this is also a return to the importance of civic participation, and then not only civic participation, but activism, right? Because there's one thing to be civically active. It's one thing to go cast your ballot. It's something else to then demand something of your legislator, him or her, and then be prepared to vote them out if they don't deliver.
And I think we're at this moment where we understand that at one point where there was more of a civil activism or an activist like on the ground grassroots activism, and how it translated or moved into more this civic participation, but somewhere there was a disconnect. Now we're returning, and it hasn't really kind of had a dance where they work in tandem at important times, right?
No.
So I think now we're in this space where, okay, how are we going to do this, right? I think this is a really interesting moment, especially like with Cori Bush, you know, getting elected, and
in Missouri,
and even what's the dude in New York?
The first openly gay, not
the first openly gay, but the progressive. But I think that's Mondaire Jones. It's two. But
Mondaire Jones. That's who I was thinking of. Mondaire. That's who I was thinking of.
Not him, but the guy who was the what is his name? I can't think of it. He was the teacher. He's a former principal that ran and won. So there were three people. It was Mondaire. It was two openly gay Black men, and there was one who was progressive. He was like endorsed by AOC and things like that. But what my point being is that slowly but surely there is these movements in terms of how do we then move this grassroots activism that has blown up into actually civic participation that has results, you know, on that level, right?
Right. And I think that's one thing that we don't get, you know, I love the fact that we are re-examining what happened during the civil rights era in this movement in a very poignant way. I respect it. One thing I would caution us against, though, is that we don't demonize it without getting, you know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Good point. Now, good point.
And what I mean by that is that they got substantive legislation, right? They got the Civil Rights Act of 1965. The reason that many of us were able to cast 80 million votes for a ticket many of us may not have been excited about is because of that work. It's because of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, right? And it was because of the highlighting of the disenfranchisement that happened then and that happened in this cycle that people said, okay, We already know what this looks like, and we know what the results are going to be. And since we know what the results are going to be, we're going to do everything in our power to negate you, right? And I'll never forget, on a very personal level, my sister moved to Georgia in April of this year. It's so shocking. I tell her all the time that I really believe it was a godsend, because she moved to Rex, Georgia. And the reason I think it was just such a godsend is that it is literally the place of Michelle Obama's ancestors. And so she literally lives in the area, right, that is like that represents of this trajectory. So she had no clue that, her political, she doesn't consider herself to be political at all, but she did not understand that, like, moving to Georgia, what that was going to mean for her family and being in, tossed into politics. And she's pissed with me all the time. She's like, I got to listen to this stuff all the time. I lived in California before where I didn't have to listen to it all the time. It was a safer state. Now I'm here in Georgia, I have to listen to it. And so I bring this up because when she went to go vote for early voting in Clayton County, when she showed up, the lady asked, my sister said, well, how's it going and everything? The lady said, almost everybody that's eligible in the county has already voted. There's at that point, and that was 5 days before the election. 5 days before the election, she said there was only 4,000 more people registered to vote who needed to vote. And that was 5 days before the election, right? And so to me, it spoke to this idea of, we are not going to let you steal this thing. We understand what it looks like. We may not understand all the details, but we know that our activism has to be tied to civic participation, and that they have to dance together, and then they cannot dance separately.
So, you know what? I want to kind of go back. Excellent point. I want to go back to you said that we don't need to bash those who come out of this civil rights struggle and have these certain philosophies around organizing and civic participation. I think that's really important. I also, adding to what you're saying is that we need not carry the political and internal beefs and divisions that happened 40, 50 years ago. Today, we must not carry that. And I think that's like when the children and the grandchildren carry the arguments of the grandparents and the siblings that had, well, my daddy said it, your daddy said it, your grandmama did this. Like, this is, this is so akin to that, is that even if you ascribe to a certain way of doing or a certain philosophy, does not mean that we cannot move into this way of how do we work? So, okay, we've come to this juncture and we've got to move this agenda. I'm going to defer and say, all right, the SNCC version, I think you'll do better in doing this. All right, I'm going to step back. Okay, the SNCC version, I'm just saying, steps back and lets the SCLC version step back. We have got to move more in that momentum, because as we said in the pre-show, it's used adequately and said everybody plays a part. Everybody has their own lane, right?
But I think we're seeing that, right? I think we're seeing that with the more progressive type of people that are being added to the Congressional Black Caucus, right? If you think about Lucy Bath, if you think about her name keeps escaping me, Corey in Missouri. If you think about even Cedric Richmond, right? I mean, Cedric Richmond, although he's going to be inside the administration, he just got a nice appointment that I think is going to be effective as far as communication is concerned, or a straight line for communication. That's what I think that the newer members inside of that Congressional Black Caucus have done, right? They have forced them to they have forced them to take their heads up out of the proverbial sand and say, this is how y'all did it. It's not necessarily working that way anymore. It doesn't look like that anymore. And so since it doesn't look like that way anymore, I'm coming to the table guns blazing. What I respect though about them, right? Even what I respect about AOC is that she has put her dissent out there. She has challenged, but when it's time to coalesce, she has done that. And to me, when we're talking about any set of organizing, you fight your point to the death. But once a consensus has been made, then wait for the next fight. And that's one thing that I think that we have to be keen about moving forward from a political perspective is that once we've come to a consensus, right? And first, let's back up. We cannot leave the table till we come to a consensus. That's the first thing. We cannot do what our ancestors did and said, well, I'm done with you. You don't agree with me. I'm irritated. I'm done, right? We can't leave the table without coming to a consensus. And then once we come to a consensus, then we need to back that and then fight. We need to fight then the next battle the next day. And to me, some of the best people at doing this are the Latinx community. And I had a front row seat of this during DACA. Right, that there were a lot of Cubanos, a lot of other people in the Latinidad, El Salvadorians, Costa Ricans, Venezuelans. I mean, who were not happy about some of the things that Mexicans were pushing for inside of this DACA package, because they were like, "This is only benefiting y'all. This is not benefiting us, right? You are the ones for the most part that have come over here undocumented, and now your children, like this dream, all of this is going to help y'all. It's not going to really help us." And I know this may sound ignorant of me, but I was like, oh, they fight like we fight. Like, oh, okay.
Oh,
like,
what? Oh my God.
What? They fight like we fight? Oh, okay, at least I don't feel so bad.
Hell yes. Okay.
Well, I didn't know until I was working for an organization in Washington, D.C., a nonprofit, and saw it like firsthand. And Dolores Huerta came in. I'll never forget seeing her. I never spoke to her, but she came into the room.
OG.
OG. And the level of respect, I'm getting chills thinking about it. The level of respect that overtook the room when she came in there, she prayed. She did. She prayed and she started. I mean, I've never seen someone be so effective at, okay, what can you give up? Right? That was her first statement. Her statement wasn't what I already know how all of y'all feel. And I understand how y'all feel about me because I'm Mexican, I'm Chicana, right? I understand where you're coming from and I understand how you see, but I'm divorcing myself from that today to be the honest power broker. So what can you give up and what can you give up? And they stayed in that room for 3 hours. After they came out of that room, they were united. They didn't all agree, but they were united. And I'll never forget, one of the biggest sticking points for them was something that was a symbol. And this goes back, I think, to a lot of what we were talking about in the pre-show about how symbols are so important and that many of the older, I would say the older CBC members or the older people have forgotten the importance of symbols. And one of the biggest, like the line in the sand for many of them was this mariachi band that was going to play on the lawn after the Supreme Court decision. And the thing that was crazy about it is that they were upset in many ways by our organization because they felt like we had paid for the mariachi band. We didn't pay for it. It was a gift. Someone had paid for the mariachi band to come and celebrate. And for many in the Latinidad, they felt like that's only speaking to one experience. It's not speaking to all of our experiences. All of us don't have mariachi bands. Mariachi bands is something of a Mexican tradition. Right. Now, I'm from California. I grew up listening to mariachi bands and seeing them hop around with them hats. Like, I didn't think anything of it, right? To me, the symbol wasn't that big of a deal, right? But to the other Latinidad folks in that room, that symbol was huge.
Right. And I think mariachi is even very specific in Mexico too. You know what I'm saying?
It is, right? And I didn't understand these things, right? By being from outside of the community, I did not get it. I did not understand it. Right. And so to me, that's the thing, you know, is these symbols. And I think we have, and I also feel like that's where we become the most reactionary, right? When we start tearing down SNCC is a symbol as much as it is an organization, right? The SALC is a symbol as much as it's an organization. And when we bash and are not just critical, then we tear down some of older black people folks symbols that become problematic. So I think older black folks understand symbols when it comes to them, but they do not understand symbols when it comes to younger black generations.
That's a really good point. I would say that's a really good point, but I also think that I agree. I also think that there is a contingency of both groups, but I'm going to say, I'll start with the elders that need to do a better job in knowing that the difference between symbol and serving as a symbol versus just allowing the space for other people to do the work, because it's just time for that to happen, because they will be, not only just pass on the torch, but train, inform, like, you know what I'm saying? And then they be even more effective sitting back and allowing folk who are younger, who can do it better, because things have changed. And I think,
right, but Kaya, this is one thing I don't think that we often think about is the financials that are tied to this, right? And this is something that a scholar, Dr. Elsie Scott, and I have had conversations about, who runs the Ron Walter Center at Howard University. And because in many ways, the CBC's legislative agenda, and they're the brainchild of Ron Walters. And one of the things is this financial piece, right? Is that they need to stay in office because they can't get a paycheck any other way, right? Is that some of them have come to that place where they have built lifestyles, and this is not to glorify them or to make them right, but they've built lifestyles around a certain salary, and they have political debt, right? So running campaigns, right? There is oh gosh, I can't think of Mervyn Dimerly's old district. I can't think of her name. I can see her face and can't think of her name. But in
I'm thinking,
I think it's Linda. It's Linda. I can't remember her name. It's going to drive me crazy. But in Mervyn Dimerly's old district, I think her name is Linda. She's light-skinned and freckles. And I remember having
California, for those people who don't know this.
Oh, yes. From Mervyn Dimerly's district is in Southern California. Mervyn Dimerly was seen as to be a saint, and by almost all that have ever known of him. And one of the biggest reasons Mervyn Dimerly was seen to be a saint is because he was Caribbean in heritage. And it's always a tense situation, oftentimes in Black communities, when you have that Caribbean heritage. Inside of a larger Black community spaces, right? It depends on where you are and what the dimensions are, but it can be a tense space. But everybody loved Mervyn Dimerly, just like everybody loved Augustus Hawkins, who are very, and I named both of those CBC members because they're very alike in temperament. But I remember having a conversation with her, and I wish I'd have came with her name so I'd have been prepared. I remember having a conversation with her, and she said, no one tells you that once you come out of office, you still have all this debt, right? That all of this debt that you have from running campaigns, she said, people don't understand that you're running a campaign every 2 years. And oftentimes the party you get basically a loan from the party to run that campaign. And that debt, a part of it comes out of your salary when you're still inside the legislature. When you're outside the legislature, there's no more check for it to come from, and it's on you. And she said you could die with that debt, right? And I thought that was so powerful, because the idea that your service still has a ball and chain around it in ways that white folks' service doesn't have a ball and chain around it was just really, really impactful. So I think there's the financial element. And then the very last thing is from the passing of the torch piece is that I think Black farmers have done this the best. I think
woo for the Black farmers.
Yeah.
I want to say, can I just say this about the debt is that I didn't know about debt until, like I said, I worked with Cynthia McKinney. And what happened is that when she lost, and the controversial way that she left, which today, if we talk about it and we look at it, we just see how stupid it was in terms of not on her part, but she was literally yanked by a security guard while running through the house because he couldn't identify her, because he said she changed her hairstyle and he couldn't recognize her. And she turned around and smacked him with a cell phone, because she has been, at that point, she's had stalkers and people, death threats. And so she unceremoniously loses and is ushered out, and she ends up with all of this debt. But because any connection to her at that time would be politically disastrous, the Democratic Party completely abandoned her. And so she spent, I forgot how many years, having to pay off her campaign debt by doing speeches all over the world. So my thing is if this woman who was totally abandoned by the Democratic Party could do it, well, God dang it, Nat, so can the other people. I am not sympathetic on that. I see you rolling your eyes, but I give a good God dig damn. But I understand what you mean is that we enter in these professional spaces. I say this often, and we don't understand the full costs of what happens, and we don't know how to maneuver it. I agree. You know, years in, when we find out, oh my gosh, I could have took out a corporation and did it this way. Years in, we're in deep debt and blah, 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 and we're like, well, I can't even pass anything on to my children, but I got to make this look sexy still. You know what I'm saying? Because I got to present to be quote unquote successful. So I agree on that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and I think, but there are some members that could move on, right, and financially be okay, right? Like Sheila Jackson Lee is one of them, right? She's a Harvard, Yale grad. I mean, like there's some of them that could, but there's a lot of them that could not. And we have to, and then people have to also understand, as you know, is that they also get a salary. I mean, they also get a budget for their staff, right? And so it's not, we're not just talking about, like, we're also talking about once they leave, the livelihood of other Black people most times as well. We're not just talking about to your point, right? We're not just talking about my livelihood if I lost, right? We're talking about everybody in my field office. We're talking about everybody in the office in Washington, D.C., right? If you are in a large district, you may have 2 field offices. Like it's a larger undertaking that I think people understand and the nuances of it, which is why it's important for us to have these types of conversations to bring those things to light, because it then shows how complex the decision making is. You still got to make a decision and you're still going to be held accountable for those decisions. But I think that we simplify some of these decisions too much. But going back to the Black farmers, I think they've done a better job at like passing this torch. And the reason I think that they've done a better job of passing this torch, and this may sound a little corny, but because they're farmers, right? They understand what it means to put seed in the ground, to then nurture the soil around it, to watch it as it buds and not to pull it too fast or not to play with it or allow it to develop, right? Let it come to harvest. They know when you should pick and when you should let it stay. And so based on the pure nature of what it means to farm, I think Black farmers have done a better job at passing this torch. And what we see amongst Black farmers, right, we see a steep decline. I think in 1902, there were about 2 million Black farmers. I think today we have about 50,000 Black farmers.
That's like 35,000.
Oh, it's even less. Okay. And so I think we're seeing less and less. But what I will say to you is that if you look at that 35,000, they are almost always from the same family, like 70%. Right, 70% of Black farmers out of that at 35,000. That's staggering. That is that low now. But 70 to 75%. I think I remember the statistic being like 72% in 2010 were from. There was a generational legacy of farming in the family, and so I really believe they've done a good job of doing that while being shafted. Right? While being historically shafted. I don't mean shafted in one administration versus the next administration. I don't mean being shafted from Democrat to Republican. I mean shafted consistently and repetitively.
Right.
Which is why I also believe that many people are calling for Marcia Fudge to be named as the Secretary of Agriculture, right? To in some ways right this historical wrong to Black farmers.
And a lot of farmers, you know, because our sister organization for ARC Republic is the Black Farmers Index. And so there's this legislation or this possible legislation that's coming up that talks about reparations in the farming community. So I really hope that happens. And if it does happen, I'm telling you, those farmers are ready and activated in order to get some sort of reparations. But you really made an excellent point. I just want to say that this, and I'll let you have the floor, is that in terms of how these families, a lot of families lost on both sides, my family lost their land due to domestic terrorism. But the stories that I'm starting to read at literally how for years or months, there had to be like 24-hour watch on this farmland with guns and everything in order to protect their land. So the length at which a lot of these families, what they had to do in order to maintain and sustain their acreage, people don't talk about that. I'm so glad you mentioned Black farmers. and for it to remain in the family, and even for families to understand how critical it is, because a lot of the land was lost due to these fights over when the whomever owns it dies and it passes down, and
which is why Queen Sugar, right? The I loved the show, right? And I just feel like it was foreshadowing to the fact that I live literally now, right? I'm in Baton Rouge. I'm literally 45 minutes from the parish where they shot the trailers, where they've shot the show. And I think that's why I've become more in tune to Black farmers. Mm-hmm. Right, is by being in that atmosphere, right? Louisiana as a state is considered to be a rural state. Mm-hmm. And so it has really, really opened my eyes to the level of discrimination. I'll just say to you from a personal standpoint, they have something what's called rural development, RD, right, is the nickname. And rural development is a loan that's backed by the United States agricultural department for you to buy a home in what they consider to be a rural area, then to incentivize, growth in those areas. It's one of the things that people don't really understand that came out of the legacy of the Civil War, right? Of the idea that the South was this agrarian society that needed some assistance. And so I'm not saying it's a direct result of that. I'm saying that idea comes out of that experience. And it's just behooved me how difficult it is for Black people to get loans RD. Like the level of insider traderism that you have to understand and how it works. It's just been, deafening for me, right? My sister has bought a home in Georgia under another federal program or another federally backed program that's been far easier, right? Whereas most of the land, around Baton Rouge is all considered to be rural, right? Zachary, Baker, Denham Springs, Gonzales, Plaquemine, places that people can look up that are around the Mississippi River, places that Black people inhabit far more than anybody else. And it's all, and all those areas are considered rural by the map standard, but Black folks getting a loan in those areas has been dismal and problematic. And if they do get those loans, they have to go to second alternative type of financing. And what I mean is they can still get the RD backed loan, but it's not coming from the big bank. Right. It's not coming from the Regions or they don't have Wells Fargo down there. Or it's not coming from the Chase or the Regions or the Capital One or the BB&T Bank. It's coming from these smaller financial entities. And so it's this idea of domestic terrorism that has lived on even outside of the actual farming of the land, but even the owning of the land that is getting considered rural, right? It's even deeper than just the farming. It's to even the home ownership on that land.
You raised some really good points. That's why I'm getting goosebumps. When are you talking about this? This is something that, just have been heavily invested in and learning about. That's why I'm really excited with Greenwood Bank, with Killer Mike. Yes. And I get this guy, but Cooper. I forgot the brother's first name. And also Ambassador Andrew Young and his son, Bo Young, all doing this Greenwood Bank, which is a digital bank, which is moving towards banking as it is going to be in the future, this financial tech space. So, and
with that being said, I know you heard about the 2 Black banks that joined, right?
No, which 2 Blacks? The industrial.
Oh bank? Gosh, let me look it up so I can tell you. No. I need to tell you the 2 Black banks that, and that's another direct result of the death of George Floyd. After his death, these 2 Black banks decide that they are going to merge. Let me give you the name. I want to give you
and look that up. Like I'm talking to.
So it is City First Bank and Broadway Federal Bank.
Oh, okay. All right.
City First Bank and I remember seeing it, right? Because it happened after George Floyd, right? When you send out this prompt for us to think about, it immediately in my mind, things started ringing out. And when I was preparing for our weekly check-in, what I thought about was, what is the common thread here? And to me, again, the common thread is, are we going to make racial progression? Are we gonna stand still where we are? And all of these things about racial progression. I don't know if you heard Chase has now committed $50 billion to close the wealth gap and has then brought Black investment bankers in to decide what to do with the money. So what I was empowered was, it wasn't even the white person saying, oh, we're going to give you 50 billion. It is, we're going to bring black folks in here who are in investment banking to tell us what we should do with the 50 billion. That to me was key, because we've seen white savior moves before, right? We've seen, we're going to throw this money at you, but we haven't seen, are we going to empower you to do it with how to do it in your own communities, and tell us what the drawbacks are on investing in this area or doing this or that.
Because you know what, and see, this is the thing, it wasn't a moral obligation, right? They didn't do it because of a moral obligation. What they saw between the pandemic and the George Floyd protest is that racism, discrimination is bad for business.
And it's been bad for business.
It's been bad for business.
Right? And that's why we cannot discredit what happened in the civil rights era, because that is what it showed us. The bus company went out of business because they would not change their rules. Racism has always been bad for business.
Right. And in knowing that is that companies and corporations cannot afford to operate the way in which they did anymore. You don't have a white majority. And in that white population, you have a growing number of white folk that are not agreeing or moving differently, that does not continue to fund this racist structure, right? Even if in the voting and how the voting turnout happened, there's still a lot of people that didn't vote, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? But you cannot do it. You cannot afford to do this anymore. The level
to your point, right. To your point. This is literally the quote. This is from CNN Business. It was published on August 27th, 2020. The name of the article is a pair of black-led banks have merged to form an institution worth $1 billion. This was the quote. We're going to do this deal because it makes sense and because it would deliver additional resources to our community. We cannot continue on this way.
Right. And so this reckoning, and let me tell you, somebody I know works in government and works in a really important part of government. And there was this conversation that they were having, and they were one of the few Black people in this conversation. And in talking about what it was, because this is like everything is raw and fresh after the George Floyd protests. And so that person who is traditionally very quiet talked about the time that they were stopped by, this is a woman, they were stopped by, 10 or more police cars and guns drawn on them for speeding, and what it did to them psychologically. And at the end of their, testimony or story, people were crying, not even understanding that the person that you greet every day moves with the level of trauma that doesn't, people think that the face of people who are experiencing these things don't look like you or I.
Correct.
Right? You know what I mean? Oh, that's Sherice is a nice person, right? And don't even know our story. And so people were embarrassed that they did not comprehend. They lived in such this obliviousness. You know what I mean? So this is also okay, how now, and having this consciousness of there needs to be something done, right? And so in manifesting what that is, I can say assuredly with Arc Republic in terms of there were so many people who reached out to Arc Republic wanting to know, how do we, what are the businesses that we support? How do we support you? How do we move this forward? I've never heard about Arc Republic. What do you do? What do you need? All of these different things. But
to that point, though, to your very point, I think that's why it's important that Linda Thomas Greenfield has been nominated as the UN ambassador. As the ambassador to the United Nations. I think it's important because she ran the Africa desk for most of her career, right? I'm taking the Africa specialist and I'm putting her to be the ambassador in the UN, right? I am centering I'm centering Blackness not only here in the United States, but I'm going to do it globally. I'm going to treat you guys as the partners that you should be. And there's a legacy of that. And Biden saw what that looked like. And I had the privilege of having former ambassador to the African Union speak to my class on foreign policy named Michael Battle. And he talked about how he was a part of the first ever summit where CEOs of major companies came to Washington, D.C. With 54 heads of state inside of Africa. And he said one of the biggest requirements, and he said the company will remain nameless, was that you had to bring your CEO. That if you didn't bring your CEO, you couldn't come to the dance because it was disrespectful to those African nations for you not to have your CEO. And it's that type of reaction to this point. It's not even just economically that we're seeing it. We're seeing the idea that we need to center anti-Blackness. We need to put it in front of everybody's face. Your friend that's working inside of the federal government, her telling her story puts anti-Blackness in their face. I'm going to put anti-Blackness in your face. I'm going to take a country girl from Louisiana, because that's where Linda is from. She's from Louisiana. I'm going to take a girl from Louisiana and I'm going to put her in your face. I'm going to make you deal with the fact that she has a career that she's built on understanding the phenomenons in Africa and how anti-Blackness is the driver at a global level. So to me, those are the things that have shifted. Now, we all have to wait, right, with some level of optimism, and some of us have pessimism on what can actually be accomplished. But to me, these are very strong signs that we are not going to dismiss the fact that anti-Blackness is not just an American thing, but it's a global phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point in talking about what comes out of this moment is the response across the globe and people putting to the fore what anti-Blackness looks like in London, what it's looking like in Italy, and people beginning to connect those dots.
And what it looks like in China. Right?
What it looks like in China. Exactly. Yes.
What it looks like in China, what it looks like in Iran, right? In places that we don't even understand. We focus on the Black diaspora in places in Europe, in the Western
world. And white, the binary, the black and white.
And the binary divide. And the problem with that is that we have Black Iranians. Mm-hmm. We have Black Afghanis.
Good point.
We have so it becomes problematic, right? A lot of the Filipino heritage is built out of this migration of Black people to that island, right? And so we have to have the conversation that this binary is built on this idea of anti-Blackness. I think who I am, for me, it's been an emotional year. And it's been an emotional year because my mentor, my advisor, I just cherish so much the time that I spent with him. And I'm going to try not to cry, but he was 70 when he directed my dissertation. He was 70 when I graduated. He was turning 71 that year. His birthday's in December. His birthday's in a couple of weeks. And he was 70 at the time. And I remember him, if we go back to the passing of the torch, saying to me, "Run, it's your time." And
girl, don't make me cry.
I was grateful for him. I was grateful because I know it wasn't until I got to him that I actually felt brilliant. Before, I just felt like I was smart and worked hard. It's once I got to him that he made me feel brilliant, right? He made me feel, and now I see the brilliance, right? I see it. And what I mean by that is it's not an arrogance. I see when I show up, I have a set of knowledge that then transforms the conversation. I see that, and that knowledge is life experiences, being where I'm from, places I've traveled, things that I've studied, the intersection, right? The fact that I have not allowed the academy to silo my knowledge and force me to just read, these 12 scholars on this particular thing, right? But I did not feel that brilliance. felt like an undeserving hood kid. And every day I showed up to Howard where there was literally legacies of greatness walking all around me who knew who they were. And not even there was some arrogant, look, like, let me be very clear. There was some of them there. Right? There was some there. But most of them, I would say the folks that acted like that were the folks that weren't even the brightest and the smartest. Mm-hmm. The folks that were the brightest and the smartest had a regalness about them, had an understanding about who they were and the responsibility that they held, and now I think of it, were tacticians and how they presented information in the classroom, and because of the wealth of knowledge that they had, experiences, and they knew where they had been and they knew what they had seen. And the crazy part was they saw me like them. I didn't see myself like them, but they did. And it wasn't until him. And I remember it because my first year I came in, he was on sabbatical. And so I worked with him for 3 years after that. But it wasn't until him that I started to realize, oh, wait a minute. I may be brilliant. There may be some excellence here, right? This may be not just hard work. This may not, I think this is common sense, but this may just really be revolutionary or something that no one's ever thought of, right? And it wasn't until that, but he never put himself in a position where he was trying to do anything but mentor me, trying to do anything but push me up, trying to do anything but let me shine, even when I didn't understand I was shining.
We're going to raise him up because those type of professors, yeah, I mean, I totally have that type of professor, Dr. Yvonne Bell. Yep. She was my undergrad. She wasn't even in my doctoral thing. And let me tell you this, it took me 11 years to get my master's and PhD. Never think it was going to take that long. I graduated, I was 40 years old. She called me every single semester from my master's on. And she would always say, hey, Dr. Shivers, how are you doing? Every single time. And when I was struggling in undergrad, it wasn't because I wasn't struggling because I didn't know the work, all of the things that just happen when you grow in undergrad. And I had a very rough semester and I actually dropped out, and she gave me an A in the class anyway. And I went back to her the next semester and asked her why. And we actually had an agreement. I ended up auditing the courses that I took that I didn't complete. But before that, I asked her, well, why did you do that for me? Like, I got to fail in all my other classes. Why you do it for me? And she said, well, because I knew if you were to sit in the class, you would get an A. And because somebody had that level of believing in me at my lowest point, that has been one of the stories that has pushed me through, because in this process, whether you're in the academy, you're in the professional space, if you believe the narrative, you would believe that you're not brilliant, you're not professional, you're not articulate enough, you are there just because you satisfy a quota. And we know that that is not the truth. So I thank that professor, for birthing and helping to birth a brilliant mind, or knew the supernova that was in the sky and pointed to it. You know what I mean?
But back to our pre-discussion about the Congressional Black Caucus. I think that's the danger is when they don't understand, right, that those words of disdain, that disposition of arrogance, that unwillingness to yield, how that is just as powerful as being an encouragement about uplifting people that are younger than you. I mean, it's that I think in many ways have lost sight of that factor. And one of them that's older that I think hasn't lost that sight of that, who I want to raise up, is Jim Clyburn. Yeah, no, he hasn't lost that piece. You don't have to come to the table and agree with him, but he really uplifts, right, the younger members, right? Mm-hmm. He'll tell you I remember one time I met him at Howard. He said, I'm gonna uplift you. I didn't say I'm gonna agree with you. And so I don't think he's quite got the balance, but I don't think he's lost sight of the fact that that's the job, right? The job is for him to do that. And one that I think does have the balance down is Benny Thompson out of Mississippi. He has the balance down. And I think that also has to do with temperament, right? I think that, people's temperament play into that phenomenon, and Benny has a totally different temperament. But I think that's the power, right? The stories, we all are just a collection of our lives' experiences. We are just a living and walking story. And when we forget that, regardless of our pedigree and regardless of where we've been, if we forget that we're just a walking story, then we forget our humanity. And I think that is what, in many ways, again, the pandemic has done. It has reminded us that we are every one of us are just walking stories.
And to add to your point, we are a continuum. We're not the beginning, and we definitely will not be the end. I think that is important. And we are not, I have to say, there's something I don't know if you've had this told to you, you ain't nothing special.
Oh yeah. And I remember Kaya, it's so funny that you say that. I remember my very first "you ain't nothing special" moment. I'm grateful to God that, and this is where I feel that many people think or think I'm older than what I am, or that there's a certain level of maturity to me. But I think it's just because of the grace of God that I got to have experiences early. And one of my very first experiences of "you ain't nothing special" stuff will go on after you leave was, I'll never forget this. I went to school in Alameda, California, for 6th grade through 8th grade. My mom and dad did not want me to go to the middle school I was assigned to. So they paid out of their pockets, struggled to send me to school. So I remember graduating from 8th grade and going to high school. And I remember going back, and I was expecting the teachers to be just so overjoyed to see me and stop their classes. And because I was a good student, and I participated very much in life, and in the life of the school, and I played a huge role, right? I won a lot of awards when I graduated from 8th grade. And so, I mean, they were happy to see me. Don't get me wrong. They spoke, but it wasn't like, it was like, oh, okay, nice to see you. I got to get back to my lesson now. Right. It was a good 5 or 10 minute chat. And then you here to see some other teachers, or what you here for. Right. And it was, I didn't understand it, how to explain it. I know that I did not have the words to articulate it then like I do now, but it was damn sure my "you ain't special" moment. It was my realization that even once I'm gone out of a space, that things will continue. And they will never be the same. And that's the other thing that it got me to understand, is that St. Barnabas was still St. Barnabas, but St. Barnabas wasn't the same when I was there. And it wasn't the same when I was there because I wasn't there. Right. And it doesn't mean that it became less valuable or any more important. It just became different. And I think that's the thing that I had to really settle into, was that it's going to go on without you. It may look different, it may be different, but it's going to go on without you. And I'll never forget having that experience in 9th grade after coming back to St. Barnabas after graduating from 8th grade. And it wasn't even anything I could talk to anybody about on top of it, right? No one expected a 13-year-old to be that deep, I think. So when I tried to have the conversation with other people, they were like, yeah, and kind of shooed me on. Or I remember my grandmother saying to me, well, what did you think they was going to do?
Yes.
But it was this inner thing, right? This inner kind of spiritual soul thing that kept me grounded to remember it will go on without you.
You mentioned something that I think it would be good we could talk about in the next go round, because we had such a long pre-show, and
right.
The show, I know I don't want to monopolize all of your time.
Yes.
But I want us to talk about education in this next thing of how it has changed. I mean, especially you having a son, being a professor, and what it might look like, right? But looking at those things of that are good. I don't know what that's going to be in education, but we shall see. But I can tell you this, Francine Louise Washington Shivers, my mother was, you ain't nothing special. You got A's. Okay, now go do them dishes. She was the queen of that. And my mom being a high school teacher, I grew up in a house where I had to share my mother literally with thousands of other kids. And so in sharing my mom with all of these students, I saw, Black and Latino kids that were as smart as I, as loving, as devoted, as committed, as brilliant as I am. And instead of being in competition, it was, we are part of this tribe. And so that is, to me, the beauty of knowing that I am not special as one. I am in this whole galaxy of specialness. You know what I mean, too? That I think that even
and that point
brings out, right?
And that point was salient for me when I attended Stillman College.
We're on the same page.
that was the salient point for me, right? And when we talk about Black farmers or whatever else, I was able to have the language to talk to Black farmers or the Black rural folks in Louisiana because of my experience in Alabama and getting it wrong, right? Because I went to Tuscaloosa, Alabama at 18 years old, a hood kid from Oakland. This life y'all living with guns, and I ain't never known no Black person to like a gun. Like, I had never understood that a shotgun at the door. I never what was a double wide, and why would you want to live in that? And it really was the precursor for why I'm able to flow and ebb in the spaces that I'm in now, because it introduced me, right? It helped me to understand that I was a part of a larger galaxy of Black specialness. And that's to me the other thing that George Floyd, COVID, and then the election of Kamala Harris has done is it has highlighted in my purview in many ways the importance of HBCUs as institutions. And the reason that I say that is that after George Floyd's killing, we see philanthropic efforts at HBCUs shoot up, right? Because it was the white world, it was the white liberal world. Once they realized, hey, I may be a racist, or even if I'm not a racist, I damn sure don't have to deal with thinking about having to die, right? I don't have to worry about that. And how can I get more involved? How can I get more connected to that experience? How do I get a true, honest voice, right? And so what we then see is then funding efforts going to these under-resourced HBCUs to then produce that level of scholarship. And so to me, that's another height of it, right? Because what we are not giving HBCU credit for is that they have done an excellent job at keeping their students COVID-free during this pandemic. Mm-hmm. Although HBCUs have made different decisions about opening or closing or whatever they're going to do, what you haven't seen in the news, and if it was a problem, you damn sure would have seen it in the news by now, is the proliferation.
No, I know for sure.
No. There's been incidents, but I don't think there's not going to be incidents, but for a large part, they've done a great job at keeping their student populations as safe as possible underneath this COVID spread, and have been really the place of camaraderie for the community. Because I know at Howard there's a COVID testing center. I know at Morehouse there's a COVID testing center. I know with us at Southern there's a COVID testing center. And so where inside of the community, we've been the place for, if you need to get that COVID test, we're the place that you can go. And not only the place that you can go, the place that people actually trust, because they feel like they can trust those who are in the community. So I think that's another thing that it's kind of highlighted this year, is the role that HBCUs have played. Like you said in our pre-show, right? We have built this country, and it's the reminder, I think, in some ways, that we built it, and the legacy of what it means to have built it, right? We are used to working in lack. We are used to working in devastation. We are
working in pandemics.
We're used to working in pandemics.
Okay.
We're used to being overlooked, right? Like, those are things that we are accustomed to. I'll never forget at Howard. This is the last story I'll tell you, but I'll never forget at Howard. There was 2 incidents that really shocked me. One was at the architecture school. where a professor gladly told me, oh, my students don't use AutoCAD until they get to their junior year in school. And at the time I was thinking, that's because y'all broken, y'all. AutoCAD. So AutoCAD is a software that you use to architects use to produce renderings.
Okay.
And so I remember he said it like was so, with that whole Howard Mecca, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, why are you so? Then I understood why he was so proud of it, because his students can go and sketch outright. They don't have to depend on AutoCAD, right? And in a 5-year program, you have to spend 2 years rendering before you can even touch AutoCAD. Now, some of that, and let's be honest, some of that was out of lack of resources, about having the licensing at the beginning when it first came out. And over time, it became a sense of pride, because even once they had the resources to get more licensing and the licensing prices came down, it was about, I need to make sure that when my students leave here, they are the best. Another example of that was at the dentistry school, because Howard runs a dental clinic for the community. And it's a learning opportunity, etc., because Howard University is a teaching hospital. And I'll never forget, this girl said to me, she was like, yeah, I was doing just fine till they turned the lights off on us on purpose. I was like, what? What do you mean they turned the lights off? She was like, oh yeah, it's a part of the Howard hazing where they put you through this drill where then you got to figure out how to get the generator on and get the equipment back up and all the stuff. And I was just like, what? She was like, yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but a girlfriend of hers had went to a developing nation, and she was like, they praised the ground she walked on because of the fact that she basically came with her tools or whatever and was able to take care of stuff
like that.
It wasn't even an issue. And I can't remember the developing nation she was in, but the biggest issue was like abscess, right? And how abscess it wasn't even about like, the vein things that we're worried about with our mouths. It was about literal infections that were setting in an abscess, and how, because of her training at Howard, because she knew exactly what materials that she would need in that environment without all the fancy, technology. Right. And they still had been exposed to the technology, right? Like she told me, again, another kind of, you don't get to the technology till your last year, right? You have to spend all this time first not using the technology, because for them, they don't want to graduate you if you can't do these things. And so to me, that's what we're used to. That's what we're accustomed to. And I think that's what 2020 also highlighted for other people, is that this ain't a comeback. We've been here. This is where we've been. This is how we've existed.
And I think that's indicative of how you do education when you are considerate of the communities in which you might go back into, right? So we're talking about rural communities where the resources might not be there.
Oh, that's a great point.
That might not be there. That still is in Howard, which is very similar to trauma doctors that go to these inner city hospitals that get this very good trauma training, because of the rates of violence. But I also want to say, with HBCUs, Howard specifically, first of all, shout out Dr. Sani, who does my tea, does my tea, who is a graduate of Howard Dental School, who actually is an African of Indian descent. A lot of people don't know there's a lot of Indians that actually use the HBCU system. So when we're talking about who accesses HBCUs at this point in juncture, it's not just Black people. There is a rising population of Indians, and specifically Africans. I have gotten to this really great conversation about, why do Indians go to Howard specifically, and in the professional space, why do they access it? And she gave this really interesting, story about how, even though she's of an Indian descent, she's not considered Indian. She's considered African more than that. And there's this network, that uses the HBCU system. It's really, so I look forward to whoever does that research. I'm not going to do it, but I thought that was interesting. But also, as much as, I could go, I love my HBCUs, but I could be a contrarian when it comes to that. but I must,
like everything else,
but I must give props to the role that HBCUs played in this political cycle.
Oh, yes.
Students that were registering people in the community, on the campuses, left and right, and how just powerful they moved and how they moved so activated. I must commend the HBCUs as
but
well.
That Kaya, I want to, and this is another name I want to lift up. That in many ways is because of Simone Sanders. That is the brilliance and the understanding of Simone Sanders by being in that, you know, she's the last generation of what you could call a millennial. I don't necessarily, you know, she's right at the edge. She understood the community. She knew how to reach the community. She said all the hard things in the meetings, right? She would, you know, she said all the hard stuff to liberal white folks that they didn't want to hear, right? She understood the power that was there and not tapping into it. And I believe that she understood it because she worked on the Bernie campaign where they ignored it. And so when she got this job and when she came into this camp,
are you right?
Right? Because she worked for Bernie, right? Right? Yeah. She worked for Bernie. And I think that was a formative experience for her because it then got her to understand the power of younger voters, but how they were not being capitalized on at these historically Black colleges and universities.
And made a very daring move that a lot of Black people in general would not make, but definitely a Black woman, of saying, to the left, that's where I'm going, in the middle of the election cycle. Do you know how bold that was to do that, to jump camp? You know what I'm saying? Like, and put her everything and take the risk of going to the Biden campaign in the midst of
because remember, she left Bernie's campaign in the middle, became a CNN contributor, and then everybody was like, her life and political life is over. Everybody has a bad taste in their mouth about her now, and she can't be rehired. And I mean, they gave sis the death sentence. And let's be very honest, she's doing it in her full Blackness, with her fade and her swoop and her nails and her big lips and her eye makeup and her eyelashes. Brows be beat. Like, she's doing it in her full Blackness, right? And she is not reserving, she's not showing up, not herself, to be then considered at that table.
Right. And so that's a really good point. And another point I want to say with HBCUs as well, too, is that a lot of people, there was another wave of students now attending HBCUs as a result of the George Floyd protests.
Girl, do you know we are up? Do you know at Southern our transfer rate is up 26%?
Wow. So this is what I'm going to say with that. Now HBCUs have the responsibility of stepping up. Part of stepping up, in my opinion, is hiring more professors like you, more younger professors, more professors with ideas that can move the campuses forward, that speak the languages of these students that are coming in. And with that enrollment, also pushing the line in terms of athletics. I was a college athlete, at Florida A&M, but also saying maybe these HBCUs can house these athletes, these top athletes that are coming out of these high schools.
Right? We're seeing that too, though, right? We're seeing that too, right? The top basketball recruit this past year is going to Howard, right? So we're seeing that too. I think the constraint is this dynamic with HBCUs that are either private or public. And I think what we're going to see is that the private HBCUs are going to have a better ability to step up and to close that gap, because they're going to be able to pay their professors more. They're going to be able to sponsor special projects. I know at Howard, they just got a grant to have the first ever women's studies continuum or focus on the campus is being led by a professor. I think her last name is Dr. Dupree. Out of the political science department. She's leading it up and heading it up with Black women across the campus in sociology and psychology and other disciplines as well. And so I think I think the issue is going to be, and I'm mentioning Howard because I remember it, Dillard, right? I sit on the advisory board of Dillard's Racial Center for Justice. I did a presentation for them at the beginning of the month of November. So the private institutions, I think, are going to be able to capitalize on this far more quickly than the state HBCUs because of the bureaucratic apparatus that's attached to them. I think it's going to make it more. It's going to make it more difficult. But I will say to you, look out for the Xaviers and the Dillards and not, I know people get upset about the mentioning of Spelman and Morehouse or whatever, but it's this idea that by being private and being, of the larger resources, they're able to do things that are that can start faster, right? Like the Racial Center for Equitable Justice. I mean, the Racial Center for Justice that started at Dillard. A board member said, "I want to do it. I'm gonna put up this amount of money. Go make it happen." And right after George Floyd, a month later, it was off the ground. That could never happen at Southern, right? Mm-hmm. It would take another meeting with the state. I mean, it just couldn't happen that fast. And so I think that's something that we need to look at is that reality of trying to get more resources in that way. And the last thing I will say on that is that we need to pay attention to infrastructure. So oftentimes we think about at HBCUs, like the hiring of professors. I think that's important. That's a part of the human infrastructure. But we don't think about the physical infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, the digital infrastructure. Those pieces are huge. And the reason that those pieces are huge is because oftentimes people will give you money to hire a professor, or they'll give you money to build a building, but they're not giving you money to maintain that building. They're not giving you money to those types of things. And so I think that we have to be also vigilant in this moment to make sure that we're looking the long road so that we're asking for those types of resources as well.
Yeah, so that is actually the fight and the difference between public and private, because what we know about that is that, like you said, there's much more red tape in the public institution, but there's also over the years have been these historic cases at public institutions in terms of them finally getting the just due funding that they deserve. So the latest one is what happened in Maryland.
Right. And they still ain't got to a settlement, right? They still fighting because Hogan will not give them the maximum of Hogan won't give it up. And I'm very irritated with Black people in Maryland because they reelected him. I get it. Y'all elected him the first time. That's fine. But you reelected him, and Black folks, you reelected him knowing that he's holding hostage that money to those HBCUs that have won in their lawsuit. This has been too long of a fight. I think the settlement was $800 million and he wanted to give them $300 million.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And so this is how, Mississippi, quiet as kept, is that Jackson State has a really good tech center because they won money, I forgot how many years ago. And what they put into it was to develop one of the most impressive tech centers in the state of Mississippi in terms of university. Hence, now you have more white students and people going to, Jackson State and Mississippi Valley State, MSVP. So, these are these things that we're talking about that nobody really talks about that is happening as a result of this huge push that is going. And I said, wow, what a good time to have a great tech center in the middle of this pandemic where now you're relying on technology. Now what we need are more people to really be brought to these institutions, and how do you optimize what it looks like? So
with that being said, and again, I'm going to highlight my school, Southern. Southern is the only HBCU that is doing medical marijuana, right?
Medical marijuana, yes.
Right?
But I'm going to talk to you about that as well.
And that's huge for homeopathic healing. It's huge for getting our communities back to not being so dependent on the synthetic uses of drugs, because we're not just talking about you smoking your joint. We're talking about how it translates into physical pill form medicine. We're not just talking about, the development of the flower as what we use to break down the smoke, right? We're talking about the true development of it as an alternative to synthetic medicines.
And also this relationship that the agricultural community at Southern has with the farmers in the area.
Yes.
That has been going on for quite some time too.
Which is why Southern combined with A&M College, right? And which is why anytime I write something, you know, there is a large contingent of the old heads, as I call it, Southern, who are, you know, if you sign something or you publish something without that A&M, they mad.
Southern A&M. And I also want to say this actually goes back to Black farmers in terms of having to be innovative and creative and step outside of these rigid boxes of respectability in order to survive, because a lot of Black farmers are, you know, there's a rise of Black hemp farming.
Correct.
In communities, you know, that is spreading and really trying to push the line in terms of, if we have, you know, a plethora of, you know, Black people who use these, you know, who uses hemp, who uses cannabis, we need to be the ones who are supplying them. So this is really interesting, you know, how the HBCUs, but even specifically Southern, are doing these really creative things. So with that, I think we are coming to a really great end.
Yes.
For this whole month of December, this is the Light series. So we're thinking about and talking through what's going on in our country, in the world, in light and love, and in these really kind of spaces where we're illuminating, you know, the things that are productive. And so I appreciate having this conversation with you, Dr. Shanice Janae Nelson. Did I say that right? Dr. Sherice.
That's okay.
With me, Sherice. That's okay. You like the you know, the niece that be like, it's Dr. Sherice.
Sherice
Janae Nelson. What the hell is wrong with me? Dr. Sherice Janae Nelson. I appreciate you coming on and talking about this, dear sis, academic colleague. I look forward to talking to you very soon.